Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. Communications Director Chris Mosier here. Here at Progress Texas, we've built a statewide audience and reach millions of Texans monthly, and that's thanks to folks like you who invest in independent, progressive media by Texans for Texans. Thanks so much to Carrie White, Marta Crawford, and Scott Porman, just three of the many Texans who support us, and we appreciate them very, very much. So today is Monday, March 2nd. That marks the 190th birthday of Texas. Texas Independence Day marks the signing of the Texas Declaration of Independence at Washington on the Brazos, March 2nd, 1836. You might note that the fact that Texas has our own Independence Day at all tells you a little bit about the Texas myth and how we tend to see ourselves as somewhat apart from, and let's face it, superior to the rest of the world in many ways. We have our own separate power grid, for better or worse. We're firing up our own stock exchange. There's pride, and then there's Texas pride. And I think most of us feel it and understand it in ways that are both collective and also highly individual. But for progressive folks in the Lone Star State, in much the same way that our political opponents see patriotism as an exercise in blind faith, turning away from the monumental injustices and inequities that underlie the American story, my country, right or wrong, as it were, folks on our side of things tend to see patriotism as love of country that involves accountability and the continued effort to form a more perfect union, as you might say. That loving your homeland includes seeing and striving to fix its failures. So, on this Texas Independence Day, as we observe and consider the Texas Revolution, we want to understand what really happened around here back in the early 19th century and why understanding that truth matters here in the present day in 2026. So I've invited Jason Stanford on to kick this around. Jason is a longtime Texas Politico, consultant, writer, Texas public school administrator, who collaborated on the writing of the terrific history book Forget The Alamo, which came out a few years ago in 2021, and was itself immediately met with hostility by the powers that be in Texas, who are perfectly content with the old heroic stories that frankly help them stay the powers that be. So Jason Stanford, thanks so much for making some time for us this morning.
Thank you, Chris, and happy Texas Independence Day to you.
Right back at you for sure. So as we start, Jason, give me your thoughts on all of that, your thoughts on Texas pride. So I've got a Texas flag flying off the front of my house right now.
Right.
I spend way too much time thinking about and talking about barbecue and Willie and high school football. So when you think of Texas pride, what does that mean to you personally?
Well, I moved to Texas when I was 23, and I grew up in Washington State, and I had never experienced anything like Texas pride. I mean, y'all have neon beer signs in the shape of the state, which we don't have in Washington State. Right. We had a semester of state history in which I had to learn which tribes were there, and I had to memorize the counties. I think there's 20 some.
Right.
And that was pretty much it. There is nothing I've ever experienced in this world, and I've lived in other countries like Texas pride. And I think it's great. It's the most endearing thing about Texas, that y'all are just so excited about it. And you think it really matters whether or not you were born here. Or I think Kay Bailey Hutchison when she was senator, she had a staffer who was having a baby in DC. Yeah. And that was so abhorrent to her that I think she had some dirt from Texas shipped so that dirt could be underneath the baby's crib.
That's actually a fairly common practice from what I've understood. Yes, like you basically put a little box of Texas dirt underneath the expectant mother's bed so that the child is actually born over Texas soil.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. That's not normal. And I think it's great not to be normal. This is the most supremely weird thing ever. And y'all think it's normal. And that's great. I love that about Texas. Where progressives get this wrong and where conservatives get this wrong, we all know, right? Well, if we're good, then therefore we've always been good. And everything we're coming from is like pure baby Jesus, sinless. We're just sprung joyfully and perfect into the world. Right. Heroism, all these virtues that we put on our forefathers. Well, that's obviously everything they did is a reflection on us. And then if you criticize them, then somehow you're saying I'm bad. I heard this so many times.
Right.
Weirdly, I remember one time I did a book event for Forget the Alamo at a nursing home. It was fascinating. And for the most part, well, there's one person there who just thought we had 3 years ago, 3 years hence, planned for the whole racial reckoning of 2021, and we had timed this book just to land perfectly in it, and I saluted her on her imagination.
Yes.
But there's one really sweet lady. She said, we've always been raised to think that Texas was good and that the people who founded Texas were good, but now you're saying, are we bad? And I had to tell her, we decide what Texas is now, right? We are Texas, not Davy Crockett, who lived here for 2 weeks before he was killed, doesn't determine what Texas is. And that the story of America isn't that we were good or that we were bad. And this is where progressives get it wrong. Like, okay, then we're conceived in original sin and therefore we are bad. Into the cheat code of the Constitution and also the Texas Constitution is the capacity for self-improvement.
Right.
And that we have become a more free people over the centuries. Are we free full stop? No. But Black people can vote. Women can vote. That's better.
Yes.
You can be gay now legally. Do gay people have all of the rights and all the protections that I do? No. But they have more. Like, the story of America is to be more perfect, not to be perfect full stop. Right. And that is also the story of Texas. People moved here from the South. And by that, I mean white colonists moved here for various motivations.
And by here, by the way, at the time, you mean Mexico. This was Mexico.
Yeah, northern Mexico.
Right.
It's kind of funny. The reason they needed whites to come from the South to settle Mexico, to settle Texas, is because the Comanches kept invading and they couldn't convince Mexicans to live here. So like, who are we going to get to live in Texas? Oh, I know. Dumb Southerners. Cool. And they were like, oh, well, the land's good there in East Texas. We can grow cotton there. But you just outlawed slavery in the Constitution. And can you make an exception? And Santa Anna went, sure.
Yeah.
And they went back and forth in Mexico on that. But you had to come to Texas from Alabama and Tennessee, like all these people did. You had to become a Mexican citizen, which meant you had to become Catholic. You had to speak Spanish. You had to be whole, actual Mexican. And you had to pay their taxes and obey their laws. And these people came here and did exactly none of that. After a while, Santa Anna sent a buddy up and said, hey, could you check it out? And this guy comes up and says, oh, my God, these people are crazy. These people are doing nothing. No one's speaking Spanish. No one's going to Catholic Mass. Right. And by the way, no one's paying any import duties because they would have stuff shipped in to our coast and no one would pay any of the Mexican import taxes. That was the first thing. That was like one of the first thing that was the come and take it came from is these guys. No, we're not paying squat.
Right.
And so the Mexican army sent like a little battalion up there and said, give us our cannon back. And they went, no. And they had a little skirmish. But the real problem was the enslaved workforce. And there were a lot of slaves in Texas at the time. And Mexico, eventually, the politics changed. And they said, no, we really mean it. That was the issue unique to Texas. There were other states in rebellion to Santa Anna at the time because he was not great at democracy. But Texas was the only Mexican state that was fighting for full independence. And the thing that made that different from the other states was the issue of slavery. It's all pretty clear. It's not the only reason that they wanted independence, but it's central to the conflict that Texas had with Mexico. Eventually, obviously, the revolution or secession, we called it in the book, transpired. The Declaration of Independence, it is true. Some critics of the book say that they didn't declare independence. They never mentioned slavery.
Right.
And it's true. If you go back and read the Texas Declaration of Independence, it doesn't mention slavery. It is a great whitewash of their motivations. The proof is in the Constitution. The Texas Constitution made Texas the most severe slaveocracy in the entire world at the time. And our story of Texas is about freedom. It is about courage. It is about all of the things that conservatives say Texas is, but it's becoming those values and it's realizing those values against our start that was opposed to freedom in many ways.
I feel like I got this idea from the book directly, and forgive me if I'm wrong about this, but Texas, to my knowledge, is the only U.S. state that has fought a war to preserve African slavery twice.
Yeah. Yeah, we did it in the Texas independence, the War for Independence, and then also in the Civil War.
The other angle that Forget the Alamo takes that is definitely not super present, or let me rephrase that. It's present in the way our students are taught about Texas history, but it's kind of subtle. Is the aggrandizement of players like Jim Bowie and Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin and Davy Crockett. These people have been elevated to larger than life status, and in the case of those who died at the Alamo, they're martyrs. I mean, in any reasonable definition of that word. While at the same time, Tejano people who were just as involved and just as important in the effort for Texas independence have largely been relegated to kind of footnote status. Juan Seguin is probably the most prominent of those people. But, if you ask, your average Texan, do you know about Sam Houston? Do you know about Davy Crockett? They're going to say absolutely. If you ask, do you know about Juan Seguin? Well, they've heard that name because there's a town named after him. But they may not know much about what he did. So the point being, the Tejano players have definitely been relegated to a lower status from the white players in the way that Texas has treated its history. And you guys kind of cover that in the book as well.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about that. What complicates that is that, I mean, you can't refer to Hispanics or Latinos as a single opinion or a single people.
Correct.
In Texas. But there are many Hispanics in Texas who are brought up with the hero story, and they're not told the heroes that they feel a part of the hero story. We talked to this one historian, Andres Tijera, and he said, he was brought up with the hero story. He became a veteran, a fighter pilot in Vietnam. But he was the first one who told us this about how he was raised to be a Texan, and then they took the field trip to the Alamo. They went into that building as Texans, and they came out as white and brown kids. And that happened we heard that once we started asking Hispanics about that, they went, oh yeah, Alamo field trip. That was a big sorting experience for them. And I have a friend, David McLemore, old reporter, retired reporter in San Antonio. He said when he was growing up, they would play Alamo after school, and all the white kids would be against all the Hispanic kids, except this time the white kids won.
Wow!
Right? So it's ingrained at such a young age that I don't think it was conscious that they wrote them out of it. Here's where it is conscious. After the War for Independence, after Texas became its own country, there was effectively an ethnic cleansing, especially in South Texas. People would go to the big ranches in South Texas, and they go up to the ranch and they'd say, I'm going to accuse you of a crime. And who do you think the new sheriff's going to believe? And so the families happened a lot, would pack up and become migrant. They'd turn these ranch owners into migrant worker families. Mm-hmm. And you don't think they kept telling that story to their grandkids. So a lot of family lore has been like that. And it's also not polite discussion, obviously, as our book proved. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of families where the kids go to school, come back, say, look, I learned about Texas history today. And the dad goes, okay, sit down. Let me tell you what happened.
Yeah.
And so a lot of kids are raised with this sort of secret knowledge that is not taught in school and that is not talked about publicly. And one time, I'm going to work my way back to your question. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to give the context to it. We did this one virtual book event. Our book came out, still COVID was going on, so we couldn't do a lot of in-person things. So we're doing this one Zoom thing. It was with a book club in Houston. And you know how you can see all the faces at the top and sometimes on a Zoom?
Yeah.
And so there's this one old white boomer dude. And I was always wary of the old white boomer dudes because, they felt this personally, like they had Davy Crockett lunchboxes.
Sure.
So I'm attacking their most basic hero code. And this one guy at the end, I was like, please don't ask a question. Please don't ask me. He raised. But it was the most shocking thing ever. He said, thank you for writing the book, because now I can have honest discussions with my Hispanic friends. I brought your book up. I brought all the stuff up with an old friend of mine. And he said, oh, okay, now we can talk about it, because they don't know if it's safe to talk about this stuff. So it's been hard for Hispanics to advocate for themselves in this way. And a lot of the fights on the State Board of Education have been Hispanic members of the State Board of Education arguing that Hispanic leaders should be written in as heroes, and white conservatives being really quite puzzled about it, thinking, oh, this is just affirmative action. You just want to list them there.
Right.
And then there's also a big chunk of Hispanics who realize, well, this is obviously a story being told to subjugate us, which it has been, make us second-class citizens, which it has been in the state that used to be theirs. And then there's a whole bunch of people in this state who are new to the state, new to the country, and just don't get it. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, my first, obviously I'm not Hispanic, but my first association with the Alamo was Pee Wee Herman. I was not raised on this. Like, this is source code for a lot of Texans. For me, it's a weird cultural artifact that people feel it's like everyone in Texas loves the Baltimore Orioles. And I'm just, what? Really? Why, guys?
So that's actually dovetails nice to this next part. The State Board of Education in Texas Education Agency, under firm Republican control, as much of the state is. In just the last few days, there's been a ramping up of conversation and conflict, frankly, over the overhauling of our state's social studies curriculum. Really openly, the goal of some of these folks is to craft a story that even further supports this rugged, individualist, heroic style of the Texas story. Conservative censorship and thought policing has become standard policy at Texas public universities in the last year or so. Give us your view of what the state wants to teach today's kids about Texas. How does that reflect through the lens of what you guys did with your book? We absolutely have seen a backsliding of a lot of the liberties that you've talked about that progressivism has provided our country, over the last 200 years plus. Mm-hmm. So what kind of a moment are we in now when it comes to understanding the history of our state from an educational, administrative sort of standpoint?
It wasn't that long ago. It was in our lifetimes that Texas taught children, elementary school children, that slavery was an issue in Texas independence. Like the beginning of the George Bush administration, there were still Texas textbooks that mentioned that. And George W. Bush didn't try to whitewash things. And his nephew, Jeb Bush, in as late as 2016, when discussing how the Alamo was going to be redeveloped and the museum was going to be expanded, said, well, this is great. We'll be able to teach all of the history now, not just those that short time when the Alamo fell and then San Jacinto, the Texans won at San Jacinto.
Right.
But the hundreds of years before that, how the Catholics came in and we can euphemistically say converted many of the natives that were here. And there's a lot of history on that downtown block in San Antonio that can be taught. And he talked about it all. And he specifically mentioned and explicitly said, and we can mention slavery. That was Jeb Bush in 2016. Well, obviously, we know what happened in November of 2016. And since then,
right.
And it hasn't just been Trump, but Donald Trump's election in 2016 officially began this era of nationalization in Texas, when we were talked about the role of the individual and everything has to be traditional and good. And Trump has recently talked about how we shouldn't talk so much in museums about how slavery was bad. This is a huge historical context, a trend that we're in. And I am not surprised that Texas officials are towing this line. It's so easy to get caught up in historical trends without realizing you're doing it. They right. Probably all just think they're doing the right thing. Bless their hearts. It's also important that there are a lot of us, and our book showed that, a lot of us who know that isn't true and want to find out what is true and are willing to share it and talk about it. And I think that was the great thing about our book. We got great reviews, but it wasn't until people started fighting about it that it had an impact on people, real people, and not just the book buying public, but had so many people come up and say, thank you for writing the book. It made them feel seen. It made them feel like their experience in Texas mattered. And we know that's true. And as long as we keep sticking up for what we know is true, and it doesn't have to be a fight, we can just tell our story and they'll fight us, and that's better.
Right.
But eventually, these trends don't last forever. And we're going to be someday we'll be on the other side of this, and our grandkids are going to go, "What the hell were you guys thinking?" And we won't have a really good answer.
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
We say all the time, I think all of us want to have a good answer for that question, 20, 30 years from now, coming from our grandkids. What did you do in 2026 when things were going so crazy?
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about when the book came out. I can remember a couple of things in particular, but I couldn't help thinking about the recent trouble that people like Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert have come into with censorship that's coming literally from the federal level, from the FCC. I was thinking about the efforts, one in particular that I remember, to suppress your book when it came out. There was a specific instance that I'm pretty sure was centered around Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, if I'm remembering correctly. Tell us that story. And did the book, you've mentioned that resistance to the book resulted in some cultural sort of importance for it and response to it. Talk about how, would the book have done as well as it did without this attempt to silence it?
Absolutely not. So we had a good 2-week run. Book came out in, I think, June 21st, 2021. Our book was doing fine. We weren't complaining about it. We got great reviews in all the big papers, and then all the things like Kirkus Reviews and Publishers Weekly. Our friends liked the book. Some people actually read it. And then, we had online events because it was still in COVID, and we had politics and prose, book people, like pretty much everything you could hope for in rolling out a book. And it was selling fine, but it wasn't blowing up the world. And then Chris Tomlinson and Brian Burrow, my two co-authors, had an online event scheduled with the Bullock Museum. Great place to talk about Texas history is the Texas History Museum. Mm-hmm. But Russell Vogt from Texas Public Policy Foundation, one of the ringleaders behind Project 2025, was so outraged about this that he tweeted that this shouldn't happen and the Bullock Museum should cancel the event. And he copied everyone on the museum's advisory board, which included, among others, the governor and the lieutenant governor and so on and so on. So basically, less than 24 hours later, it was canceled. Mm. We weren't told why immediately, but the story picked up legs, and then it got up and ran after Dan Patrick the next day claimed credit for it, calling our book a fact-free retelling of the Texas history, and that we had no place in the History Museum. I think it made international news, but it definitely made national news.
Yeah. And
within a week, so many people were outraged that our book had, in shorthand, been banned by by Texas Republicans. Within a week, we'd sold out Amazon. Our publisher hadn't printed enough copies. And the only reason we weren't higher on the list is there weren't more books to sell. It was hard to keep the book in stock at Book People. It was dizzying. And it continued to sell that year. And I think we came in number 2 on Book People's most sold book that year, because people were giving it at Christmas. We thought it'd be a good Father's Day gift. Like, oh God, what am I going to give Dad? Oh, here's a history book. Cool. But no, people gave that book for Christmas and continue to give that book. And to people, it was really funny. My son that year, he did his freshman year at UT San Antonio, and he took a Texas history class, and they talked about the book, and he sent me a screenshot, and it was the cover of the book up on a screen in front of his class.
That's great.
At the end of his class. And again, my son's name is Hatcher Stanford. This is not, there's no mystery here. He goes up and tells the professor, "Hey, my dad wrote that book." And the professor, very excited, says, "Oh, your dad's Brian Burrow?"
That's great. Yeah. So the book for me, I haven't given it as a gift. I haven't purchased it. I hate to tell you to give as a gift, but
there's still time.
Of course, I did give my copy. And let me actually back up. I actually read your book on my first actual legit vacation that we took as the COVID thing was beginning to wind down. We were actually in Greece. We were on Mykonos. Wow. We took a really cool, one of the coolest trips we've ever taken. I read your book in about 2 days sitting next to a pool in Greece. And so it's an important memory for me. And I forget who I gave the book to, but I do when I have a book that really hits me and really sticks with me, rather than keeping it around as though I'll go back to it someday, I always try to give it to someone saying, "You need to read this." And I forget who I gave your book to, but I did give it to someone. I don't have it anymore. Maybe I need a backup copy at this point.
That's really great.
continuing, Jason, I think a lot of us progressive types here in Texas, especially those of us who may have emerged from more traditional and conservative families and backgrounds, might be a little reluctant to talk about this stuff for fear of being a buzzkill. How can progressive Texans maintain our pride in Texas while also not sidestepping the realities of the Texas founding?
I think it's the story. It's the King quote about the arc of history bending towards progress.
Mm-hmm.
Like it takes us all to get there, and the story is the getting there, not the having been there.
Right.
As long as we tell, I think it's a story of overcoming our beginnings, and it's not forgiving them for their sins, but understanding that they weren't perfect, and it's our job to do better.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are people like we had some pushback from other writers, other historians who basically forgave slavery. Like, oh, it was accepted back then. And that's not true. I mean, in colonial times, there were a lot of people arguing about slavery.
Sure.
Before it was even legal in New England, they were arguing about it. And Thomas Jefferson, who wrote one of the greatest documents ever about human freedom, enslaved people and ordered his enslaved son to be whipped within earshot of him. Does that mean what he wrote about human freedom was hypocritical? Yeah. Does it mean it wasn't true? No. It means he was wildly imperfect.
Right.
And
we're
not expected to be perfect. We're just expected to be better. And to be good is hard work. And that is the work we do.
That's right. Becoming more perfect is supposed to be part of the deal. Jason, this has been a great talk. While you're on the horn real quick, I don't want to let you go without picking your brain a little bit, just in a
Sure.
more general sense. Really exciting days in Texas lately with a great big early voting turnout over the last couple of weeks in the primary. The Jasmine versus James situation, the Cornyn versus Paxton situation. Give us a couple of minutes on where your head is right now in Texas politics and what you might say at this moment to a plugged-in progressive audience as we start thinking about November.
I remember in 2008 during the primary, I was having lunch with Elizabeth Lippincott.
Yep.
And we couldn't believe how many people were voting. It was just stunning. And she said, yeah, it's like this alternative universe where people give a shit. And that's what's happened here. Because from everything I'm seeing, there are some Republicans who are good at analyzing voter data that I listen to. And one of them said about the state Senate race in South Lake. I always say South Park. In South Lake. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that there was a Democratic surge. It was that the vote showed up exactly as he expected, but a lot of the Republicans voted for the Democrat. So that's hopeful. Also, a lot of the Democratic primary vote is some of them are new voters, they're young, but a big chunk of them are general election voters who are voting in a primary for the first time. And so that does signal, and nationally, we're seeing a lot of Democratic enthusiasm that hasn't been this high since 2008 nationally. So I think the more progressives stop fighting with themselves and realize none of us are perfect, but they're pretty good. So I think we got a lot of good choices and a great opportunity in November.
Right. Good moment to mention that on this Monday, Texas Independence Day, tomorrow is election day in the
I got to go
primary.
vote.
So if you haven't gotten that done, like Jason hasn't gotten it done, go get it done for sure on Tuesday. Real quick, Jason, let's not leave out your awesome Substack. Tell us about the experiment and what you're doing with that.
Thank you. Yeah. For past 6 years or so, I've been writing a weekly essay and sending it out on Substack. Because no one asked me to, but for some reason I thought I needed to do something. I am a white guy, so I started a newsletter. If there were two of me, I would have started a podcast. It's called The Experiment on Substack. It is absolutely free, but you can still pay for it if you want to. It's a weird business model. I try to write something. I've never had this experience before where I had readers. Like there were readers who just like showed up to read me. I was in papers before with a column and whatnot, but to honor that commitment, I try to write something every week that I think that I'm actually thinking about or that I really believe, and try to say something true every week. And it is so much harder than you'd think to come up with something new that is true that you believe every week,
right?
That is worth someone sitting down and spending 10 minutes to read.
As we're sitting here, your most recent entry is advocating for punching people in the face. Do you mean that literally?
Yes. Okay. Yes. When I was a kid, if you said something real bad, you could get punched in the face. And then our parents told us to use our words. And look where that got us. You know who has words? Donald Trump has words. He has all the words. He has the best words. Does anyone ever punch him in the face? No.
Not that I know
of. The
of.
world would have been better off if he'd been punched in the face a lot in military school. But no. So yeah, I think there's a lot of racists and misogynists and debate me bros out there who wouldn't say the awful, cruel, destructive stuff they'd say if someone punched them in the nose.
Interesting.
I think that is a big problem in our society, is that you don't face consequences for the consequences that you used to. Now, obviously, this could be taken too far, but maybe occasionally punching a racist in the nose would work.
Yeah. Well, Nazi punching of course, should be an Olympic sport. You ask me.
Yeah. When we brought that up, we debated that all of 2017. I actually found sermons in Australia about that topic. Is it ethical and moral to punch a Nazi in 2017? Yeah. And then we just stopped talking about it like we'd solved the problem. We should have kept punching Nazis.
I can't argue with that at all. Jason Stanford, author, thinker, Texan. Happy Texas Independence Day, Jason. And we really appreciate the hang very much and appreciate the time.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Our mission at Progress Texas is to improve and save Texans' lives by acting on our shared, bold, progressive values. And that starts with countering the billionaire and corporate-funded conservative disinformation machine. Progress Texas is an independent, nonprofit, rapid response media organization. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action here in the Lone Star State. I'm Chris Mosier for Jason Stanford. Thanks so much for listening. And get out there and vote, and we will catch you again real soon.